Hi, folks. This is Empowering Democracy, and I'm your host, Joe Firestone. Our topic for tonight is changes following a Russian victory in the Ukraine war. And before I get into that, I want to say a few words about my recent absence. Okay, Lana Dell is still here. She says, I am in the car just saying hi. Hi, Lana. How are you? Oh, I have also Dee Pierce from Around the World with Brandy and Dee.
Hello,
Co-host
everyone.
Around the World with Brandy and Dee is joining me to help with the discussion.
Yes, I'm happy to be here.
Okay, Brandy Weaver, the
Sorry.
co-host of Around the World with Brandy and Dee, is also here. So thank you very much for joining me. Okay, once again, our topic for tonight is changes following a Russian victory in the Ukraine war. But before I get underway with that, I want to say a few words about uh, the last 2 weeks, because as many of you know, I've been gone for 2 weeks or so. My absence was caused by a blood pressure incident, which in turn was caused by stress from being a part of, I guess, of too many shows, but also not really being aware of how to handle the stress. So I had to take a vacation, okay, of 2 weeks. That's what has caused my absence. The blood pressure incident was one where my blood pressure uh, sort of exploded to 192 over 110. I never had that before, so I became, very afraid of it. Saw my doctor the next day because I have real good insurance that lets me see my doctor the next day. And so she gave me a thorough checkout, and there were no problems except for the high blood pressure itself, which by the time I saw her had fallen into the 140s. So, uh, so since then, I've been hard at work using natural methods to take down my blood pressure. I'm happy to report that it's been below normal uh, for quite some time and has been looking very well, especially over the last 3 days, and was looking really good this morning, okay, as well. I did notice that as I was preparing for my shows tonight, that it did go up a little, but it was still well within the normal range for someone, okay, of my age. So things are looking very good for me right now from the health point of view. And I have been experimenting with all kinds of techniques to keep my blood pressure down and to handle stress. So I expect that things are going to be normal from now on, but I'm going to have to watch things each and every day and continue to cultivate all my efforts to get rid of the stress reactions I was having to things. So that's all I'll say about that now. I want to switch to our discussion of changes following a Russian victory in the Ukraine war. To set the stage for that discussion, what I want to say is okay, assume, as many people are contending, especially Scott Ritter, uh, okay, also Colonel McGregor, and also the Duran folks, and many, many more now predicting that this war will probably be over with a Russian victory by this summer sometime. And that looks like it's very probable because the Russians have been becoming increasingly successful in grinding down the Ukrainians. And this is without even throwing into the fight the 300,000 reserve troops that they now have readied for this fight. There are no such reserves, okay, which the Ukrainians have. So it's nearly a certainty that there will be a devastating offensive coming very soon, and that this is likely to end the war by putting it into a situation where there is nothing for the Ukrainians to do, okay, except to negotiate and to negotiate on Russia's terms, which means we're looking at a situation uh, where the Donbass and the whole eastern part, okay, of Ukraine, probably including Kharkov and including Odessa as well, which of course is not in the eastern part, but going all the way down to Odessa, is likely to be, okay, in Russian hands. If it's not, okay, in Russian hands as a result of the settlement of the war, if the whole thing is not, okay, in Russian hands, it will only be due to the generosity of the Russians in wanting to end the war on relatively friendly terms, okay, with respect to the Ukrainians. But what I'm asking you to imagine is a situation where Ukraine is very close to being a rump state with no access to the sea and with a large part of its current population annexed into Russia. In that world, which would represent a defeat not only for Ukraine, but for NATO, with continuing hardships for much of Central Europe and perhaps for part of Western Europe, okay, as well. Uh, okay, and it will certainly be viewed by the world as a serious defeat for the United States as well, because we have been up to our ears in keeping the war going for some time. So you have to imagine a world in which our status and prestige, that basis for some of our power, uh, has been removed by this particular defeat. This is also being accompanied by the expansion of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization to include roughly uh, a larger number of nations, totaling something like 3.3 billion people, okay, cooperating more and more closely. Okay, and of course, the currency activities to try to displace the dollar as the reserve currency of the world. Uh, in that kind of context, what are some of the changes that we're going to see, okay, in the world? And here I'd like to start a discussion continent by continent. What are some of the changes that we are likely to see, that we in the United States are going to have to adjust to? And I'd like to discuss here also how we are likely to adjust to those changes as they come upon us. Okay, so with that as an introduction, okay, I'd like to throw things open to Brandy and Dee uh, to contribute whatever they'd like to contribute on the subject. I'll be commenting too. I do not expect that this is going to be a discussion which will be concluded today. We have until 10 p.m. today. It's a big subject, and we'll be returning to it, okay, in future streams, I think. But for now, this is the opening stream. I also want to emphasize that one of the things we're going to have to focus on is how these changes on the world stage in so many nations, what implication they have for our main purpose in this program, which is to empower democracy. What are the implications for democracy across the globe of what is likely to happen to us over the next 4 or 5 months, and what has been happening to us really since we refused the overtures of the Russians to make peace and were thus facing a war with them since February 24th, of last year. Okay, folks, please hop in.
I'll hop in because I'm not going to be able to stay on for very long, but thanks, Joe, for having me. One of the major things that I think we're going to see is we're watching right now, we've been watching BRICS getting stronger. We're watching the U.S. hegemony get weaker. We're going to a unipolar world again. And we're going to be watching that as BRICS continues to get stronger. And I think
Just a question, didn't you mean to say we're moving to a multipolar world?
Yes, a multipolar world. Sorry for that. We're going from a unipolar world to a multipolar world. And so we're going to be watching BRICS getting stronger. We have put so much money, not only the US, but also the European countries, the European nations have put so much money in to where a lot of their people are struggling. And so we're watching these anti-war protests going on throughout Europe and throughout the US as well. And so I think we're going to continue to see more of that up until the end of the war. And you've got some pretty irate citizens, especially with what's gone on with Nord Stream. They're going to be demanding that their government finds out exactly what did happen and demanding justice for that, because that put a lot of lives at risk.
So my next question, I guess, would be, what is justice in this particular situation?
I think it's going to be if their government knew who did it and did not act within NATO or the UN. I think there's going to be an uproar in Germany and several of the other countries where we're going to see a completely replacement of their government. And they're probably likely to ask for sanctions, especially if it comes back that our government is responsible for payment.
Okay, so you think that they will ask for reparations for destruction of the pipeline?
Yep, because they've all had to pay higher utility bills. So they're going to want something for that suffering.
Much higher utility bills.
Mm-hmm.
But also, they've also had shortages, actually, haven't they?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
They've had shortages. We've had shortages, which ours is not due to the utilities. Ours is other things. But they've had shortages. We played a live video on Twitter last week of a woman who I think she was from Britain or one of the UK islands, and she was livid. She's like, you can't trust your government. You can't trust anything that they say. They don't care about us. And that thing rings very familiar to how many of us have felt for a long time. But she's like, we're going without because of this. And so I see these uproars that we're seeing in England and other parts of Europe, they're going to continue until the people get some sort of justice in a way.
Okay, I see these two. I guess my question would be, are the governments of Europe likely to survive the political crises that they are now facing?
Possibly not. Um, I think it depends on how they react and how they respond to their people, because when, let's just say, everything that I've seen coming out of Europe, even in recent years, they don't take it like we do. We, I, Americans are not lazy. We think there's no chance, so there's no use bothering your time. So many people have given up. And in Europe, they are much more headstrong, and they've been fighting it. And that's the reason why they have what they have. And they've learned that they can get what they want through mass mobilization.
So probably the most successful of the European nations, where people are getting what they want or have historically gotten what they
Mhm.
want through activism, probably France.
France, but I mean, like, they have so many more benefits, and it's because they've worked hard and they fought to get them. And that's what a lot of Americans don't understand, is you can't just sit there and say, okay, they told us no. Okay, then no, we don't get it. No, they fight for it.
Um,
And France has had some really big protests.
yes, they have, and they're having some right now.
Hmm.
What are your hunches about which of the countries in which the governments are most likely to fall in a fairly short time?
I think definitely France and probably Germany is my best bet. I mean, because it affected them all, but the pipeline was between Russia and Germany.
Yes.
And so technically it was property of Russia and Germany. And isn't Russia still part of the UN as well?
Oh, yeah.
They've not been kicked out, which people were calling for them to get kicked out, but they weren't. So
No,
you've got
they
Russia.
weren't kicked out, and
Yeah,
also I don't think they will be kicked out because
no.
um, outside of Western Europe and nations very close in our bloc, most of the countries involved are sympathetic to the Russians because they believe that over a period of years there were provocations by the collective West.
Hmm.
And those were systematic and they were ongoing and they were persistent. Okay. And many other nations believe that the Russians had a perfect right to try to block what was beginning to look like an impending invasion. Okay, so there's that. Okay,
Yeah. Yeah,
uh,
I think we're going to see some massive uproar, though, as things happen and as things progress.
okay. Let me ask another question. Uh, let's say the government in Germany does fall.
Hmm.
What are the chances that there would then be a rapprochement of Germany with Russia? Okay, and attempts to very quickly revive the pipeline?
I think it would be very good, because if we think about it, they got lucky this winter that it was a mild winter and
But they're
not
not
worse.
expected to be so lucky next winter.
It may not be so lucky next winter, and for them to be able to get the natural gas and things shipped in from the US, it's going to take longer to build that infrastructure. And so they'll be able to get it quicker and easier from Russia. So
And
anybody with a brain on their head,
and much cheaper.
yeah, which will, ease some of the tensions with the people. So I think that will wind up, that bond will reform. I think there's going to be less trust of US within Europe over that, especially if it does come out that we were responsible either financially or physically.
Do you think NATO will break up over this?
I hope so.
I didn't ask that.
If it comes out that the US is responsible for either financially or physically responsible for the Nord Stream pipeline, yes, I think that will be what kicks it off and cause NATO to break up.
Because from a legal point of view, an international legal point of view, a NATO legal point of view, the destruction of a pipeline, is an attack by one NATO member on another NATO member.
Yep.
Okay, and the remedy for that, of course, is for the NATO member conducting the attack to be kicked out of NATO.
Yep. And then we got to ask what the UN's going to do as well, because the US is a stronghold in the UN. So pretty much if the US says no to anything, the UN doesn't act. So is the UN going to stay together, or are they going to break up as well if NATO breaks up?
Yeah, I don't think the UN is going to break up because there are so many nations that think they benefit from the UN.
Is there a way for them to kick the US out of it?
Oh, I don't think they'll try to kick the US out of it. What they might try to do, if they leave it to NATO and NATO kicks the US out of it, then people would probably perceive that as a good thing to have happened, and they would back efforts to fine the U.S., to create financial compensation for the governments and peoples of Europe that lost as a result of this. It could result in the EU and NATO just being exclusive to Europe.
Yeah.
But there's also a very good chance that NATO would simply be disbanded because people would have to make an assessment of whether the Russians are a military threat, to Europe. And there are going to be a lot of European nations that will think that they're not a military threat because they don't intend to conquer Western Europe. And even though their relations with some parts of Eastern Europe are touchy, it doesn't seem to me that they represent an invasion threat. Their moves recently, in expanding their army to 1.5 million people, seem to be aimed, at ending the Ukraine war.
Yeah.
And trying to stabilize their borders and the borders of others with them.
Yeah.
And from the standpoint of peace for everybody, that's probably a good thing. We have a lot of comments from people here that are interesting. We'll take up those in due course. So those are some of the changes in Europe that we can see. For me, Europe seems to some extent a difficult area because the Poles are not always rational when it comes to the Russians.
No, but I've learned some recent things on Poland that I didn't know um, about them having, and I learned this from Abel, who we had on our stream Sunday night,
Yes.
and he was telling me about a documentary. I haven't gotten to watch it yet, but they're actually, the Poles are pretty much the same school of thought as many of the Ukrainians, or many of the Poles, not all. But there's been issues of them having some Nazis in there.
Yeah, I know there's been some issues, but I really can't see the Poles embracing the Nazis after World War II and the killing of so many Poles in concentration camps.
Yeah.
In other words, the Poles were big victims also.
But they've also backed Ukraine, which we know all support the Stefan Bandera and his killing of 1.5 million Jews
Yes,
alongside Hitler.
right. And I had read that too, that historically some of the Nazis were in Poland, and you have the descendants, the next generation with the mindset.
Yeah, you have a descendants,
Mm-hmm.
but it would be such a touchy situation for them if there's a rapprochement of Germany and Russia around the pipeline.
Yeah.
Okay, then the Germans would not at all be fond of the idea of creating a conflict with Russia. So the Poles
No,
would pretty much be isolated because they can't expect to take on the Russians by themselves.
yeah, Poland and Ukraine will be isolated in that sense,
Yeah,
or
so the
what's
question,
left of Ukraine.
right?
I expect Ukraine to break up into two separate countries, or at least part of it go to Russia. The Donbass and eastern Ukraine join Russia.
Yes, I expect that too. And I expect that there's going to be a much smaller Ukrainian state. We also have to reckon with the fact that half of the population of Ukraine has left at this
Yeah.
point. In other words, they're refugees, and some of them are established, in other nations.
And some of them that have gone to other nations have also not been happy with the diversity that are in the other European nations. So
Right.
there's been
And
interviews.
there are also some of them
So,
who have gone to Canada and gone to the United States
yeah,
and are feeling much more comfortable.
yeah,
So it's hard to tell how things are going to work out because there are so many moving parts to it.
yeah.
Okay, but
It's
and it also depends on the United States. Okay, if there's a breakup, of NATO, that still leaves open the possibilities that the Poles, and the Baltic nations would still seek very tight alliance with the United States. And we don't know how that would sit with the politics here.
yeah.
Okay, unfortunately, that might be very popular here.
We will have to see on that one. I mean, it's hard to guess because right now, basically, what we're doing is we're trying to make educated guesses on what we think is going to happen. I think it's going to depend on the 2024 elections
It's going to
as
depend on
to,
the 2024 election and on the precise politics of the 2024 election
mhm,
with respect to foreign policy in these areas.
yep,
So we have to watch for that, and we have to be very attentive to what is going on there,
mhm,
Mhm.
and we have to be attentive to political tricks that are likely to originate in both parties
Yep.
to try to make the other party look bad and to somehow lay blame on the other party for what has happened. Uh, okay, it looks like this is going to complicate the 2024 elections very much.
Mm-hmm.
And we also have to consider where that leaves the dump the corruption effort. I mean, we badly need new people in there who will take the situation in Europe, in Eastern Europe, and Central Europe and look at it with new eyes.
Yeah. Because what you're going to get with either the Republicans or the Democrats, either way, it's going to be grossly biased to their party.
Yes,
The Republicans will blame the Democrats for interjecting and starting the war with Russia. And then the Democrats are going to say that Republicans are siding with Russia and they're traitors. And we're all pretty much, I mean, heck, I've been called a traitor I don't know how many times just because I don't agree with us being involved. And that's not me taking a side, that's us not being involved.
yes. Yes, I understand. I don't think I've been called a traitor yet. I'm not sure why.
I've been told I should leave the country, that I should move, that they don't want traitors here. And that's not me. I have not defended Putin. There's things I dislike about their politics. There's things that I like about their politics, but where I'm standing from, I'm doing it from a people perspective and a humanitarian perspective. We should not be involved.
Of course, we should not be involved, and we
So,
certainly have not been pushing Russia into war.
yeah, exactly.
First
And
place.
we did.
Yes, and we did that for over 20 years.
Yep.
It's 1999.
They may have said the Cold War ended. I don't believe it ever really ended in many of these dinosaurs' minds.
Okay, I think it ended on the part of the Russians.
Yeah,
They
not
thought,
in our government.
but it never ended from the standpoint of our government. We were
Yeah,
always after getting rid of Russia as a great power.
yeah,
That was always our objective.
yeah. And I just don't, I think that that's been because if we look back to 2014 and the Maidan coup, there was both Republicans and Democrats involved in that. And that's something that we need to remember, that both parties, that was a bipartisan effort to perform a coup in Ukraine to turn them against their government, create a new government that was against Russia.
Yes, and we also have to remember that the objective in being against Russia was to do regime change there eventually,
Yeah,
and
in
then use
Russia.
the regime change to break up the Russian Federation into smaller states that could not become a world power.
Hmm.
So, how would we feel if somebody did that to the United States?
Exactly.
If they supported regime change here to bring in someone as president who would consent to the dismantling of the United States so the United States could never become a world power again. I mean, it
Yeah.
was a grossly aggressive foreign policy that we had no right under international law to pursue.
Yeah.
I mean, it was it's just a horror
I mean, look
that
at
we tried
Lindsey
to do this.
Graham threatening Mexico. Look at all the stuff that both parties are trying to s- uh, attack China verbally, and making threats towards China. We need to remember that if we want a world to where we don't have to be afraid of waking up to a nuclear war every day, we need to get rid of every single one of them out of both parties and put people in that have some common sense.
You know how I feel about that.
Yeah, I do. And that would be nice to not have to worry about, nuclear devastation, nuclear annihilation, or a nuclear winter because all these nuclear powers, and we are still increasing our nukes here in the US, increasing our numbers on
Oh,
that.
yes, we are, and so are the Russians, of course.
Yeah.
We have to also recognize that the movement to a multipolar system uh, we have historical experience with multipolar systems
Yeah.
because the world used to be a multipolar system.
Yeah.
And
Before
what
World War II.
in multipolar systems is that the various poles, the important nations in those systems, inevitably play balance of power politics.
Mhm.
And that may keep things stable for a long time. In Europe, it kept things stable pretty much throughout the whole of the 19th century. But eventually, multipolar systems without some kind of governor on top of them fail. And when they fail, there is bloody war, as we
Yeah.
know in the First World War, okay, in the Second World War. So having a multipolar system rather than a unipolar system, okay, is a solution to the tyranny of a unipolar system, but it's not a solution to having a peaceful world.
Yeah. And I think that that's something that we're going to have to start holding our governments more accountable instead of going with the partisan system. Like we've got so many of our representatives, not just Lindsey Graham. We had Ted Cruz out the other day threatening one of our South American countries over there, them allowing Iranian warships in their port. They're sovereign, but why do we get to threaten them for that?
Well, we should threaten them for that.
Exactly. We
Okay,
need
by
to
the way, which was
have.
the South American company that allowed an Iranian warship?
Was it Brazil? Let me look that up. I can tell you. I think it was Brazil.
If I had to guess, I would guess Brazil because of its own size, okay, and power. I mean, it's in a position to defy the United States.
I am Googling it.
Do people know Brazil has a population?
Yep, it was Brazil.
Yes. Do people know Brazil has a population of 216 million people? Okay, our own country is about 335 million people right now. Okay, so Brazil has 2/3 of the population of the United States.
Yeah,
It can become a major international military power if it wants to,
especially with the resources they have.
especially with the resources they have and with the skills their population has.
Oh, yeah. Josana, who used to be with RBN, is from Brazil. So I actually learned quite a bit about Brazil from her. So I like having those learning from the people who come from those other countries. To me, I learn more that way than I do learning from our own government about these countries. And let me tell you about the people in Brazil. They're fighters, especially the natives. They will fight, they will literally fist fight their own government in the streets, and they have.
Yeah, they are fighters. I know. Years ago, we used to run a small microcomputer company, and one of our employees was the daughter of. She was the daughter of a Brazilian general,
Oh.
and she told us an awful lot about Brazil
Mhm.
and how people think. Okay, in Brazil, so we learned quite a bit from her. But I've always kept close watch on Brazil
Yeah.
and what.
Joe Sana was quite a revolutionary in her
Ah,
own
yes,
right.
I remember Josana from uh,
Mhm.
RBN. Yeah, is she still with RBN?
She took a break from social media and everything. So,
It's probably for very good reasons. Also.
yeah.
Uh, okay, so we've got a bunch of comments here.
And I don't know if Dee wants to speak up. I've been kind of going nonstop. I apologize for that.
No, I'm happy you have. No, I think we should get to the comments. I interceded when I wanted to answer something or felt I wanted to respond.
Okay, very good. Let's do that. And let's keep in mind that this is going to be the first of many programs on this subject because we have other continents to go through
Hmm.
and more to say on Europe and what is likely to happen. My objective in this stream was to get people thinking about the impacts on the whole world of the events in Ukraine and the conflict between the Russians, okay, and NATO.
Can I add one thing, Joe?
Please, Brandy.
We need to make sure that our government, when they make treaties, that they uphold those treaties.
We absolutely do.
That is one of that is something that led to a lot of this is us not upholding our word, whether it was on paper or not. We still made that promise that we would not advance past Germany.
Yes, we did, but from a technical point of view, that was never a treaty, and I
Yeah. But
understand. Okay, well, but the JCPOA, the deal with Iran, that was a treaty,
mhm.
okay, or at least an executive congressional agreement, and we just stepped out of that because we felt like it.
Well, and that's one thing is when we elect presidents the way we do, the president on their own should not have the ability to step out of a treaty.
Yes, should not have the authority to break a treaty, and
Yeah,
really, they don't really have the authority to break a treaty. Okay, in other words, they have an authority to break an executive agreement because it's between the previous executive, okay, and the executive in another country.
yeah,
They don't have the legal authority to break a treaty, and they shouldn't be allowed to do it.
exactly.
Okay, so let us get to some of the questions.
Okay.
Okay, we have the usual greetings and comments and things. And K. Ryan says, I back Ukraine and wish they get the planes they need to win it. Otherwise, all of us will have to deal with Russia.
Honestly, I'm not afraid of Russia. I honestly am not.
Yeah, I feel the same way, Brandy. I welcome Russia. I welcome China. I welcome BRICS.
What I think is that uh, when you look at Russia, they're a nation of 146 million people.
Hmm.
They are a powerful nation. largely because they have so many warheads and because their scientific, okay, and technological area is very strong, and because of the raw materials, they're rich, okay, in raw materials that a lot of other countries need.
Yeah.
And will be becoming increasingly more powerful because they occupy 1/7 of the surface of the earth. There is nothing we can do about it, but at this point, we have no reason to believe that Russia is a particularly aggressive nation. Okay, I want to emphasize that the wars the Russians have been involved in of late have been wars having to do with threats to their borders and to the balance of power surrounding them, which have been introduced by the collective West. There would not have been a problem in any of those cases if we hadn't been trying to turn Georgia against them,
Yeah.
okay, or Ukraine against them, okay, or trying to establish a power position in Central Asia where we have no reason to be. Okay,
Yeah.
all it's not an area of interest for us, and it should not be. And we've been intervening there because, again, it's about our wanting to take down Russia.
And I think that a lot of that goes back to the idea of us wanting access to their resources for cheap.
Yes, which is a lot of what moves our government,
Hmm.
and which is not a good neighbor policy, which the government of the United States was following for a while. Okay, then after the end of the first Cold War, we suddenly started to become again an imperialist nation. And that was because of the influence of our businesses on government.
Hmm.
It's the old situation of businesses wanting to have a free hand in other nations, which then gets them to lobby us to get them favorable conditions, okay, in other nations, and to try to overturn governments that want to pass laws that place limits on our businesses in their countries.
Yep.
They have a perfect right to pass laws in other countries to limit the activities of our businesses and constrain our businesses to their public purposes. And yet, our foreign policy continuously strives to overturn governments and regimes in other nations because they're trying to pass laws and institute policies which are for the benefit of those nations. Now, I'm sorry, Kay, that is wholly unjust. And that's what we've been trying to do in our foreign policy towards Russia. This is not about simply Ukraine and Russia and whether we like the Ukrainians or don't like the Ukrainians. It's about whether the balance of power surrounding Russia is such that it's likely to lead to war and peace, to war over peace. And what
And
the United States has been doing there for decades is to create the conditions for war.
and we do have to look at the humanitarian aspect of it with the Ukrainian people. Do any of them, whether they live in East Ukraine or West Ukraine, deserve to live in a war? We want this to end as quickly as possible so that anybody who's still there or wants to go back there has a home to go back to or has the ability to rebuild. We want to look at it from the humanitarian aspect, and we got to look at the fact that East Ukraine is a majority of ethnically Russians, and they've been getting bombed and shelled for 8, 9 years. And it has been asked of um, the UN to help stop the bombing and shelling for those people that live in eastern Ukraine. They don't deserve that either. And that's the thing. If Ukraine won the war, that would still continue. And that's not okay.
Yes, that would still continue because their policy was to oppress and perhaps to commit a genocide against the people of the eastern part of their country. And those policies were motivated by, in large part, by the Nazis in the Ukraine government.
Hmm.
We
And the
can't
Azov
forget that.
battalion. Yeah.
We can't forget that. It was the Banderites
Hmm.
and the right wing of politics inside of Ukraine, which shelled and killed 14,000 people between 2015 and 2021. People who wanted to live in peace and who were doing nothing at all but living according to their own cultural needs.
They were outlawed to even be able to speak their own language. They're the ones that asked Russia to step in. And
Yes,
Russia has said no for years
for years,
and not
no, they resisted that.
stepped in.
Yeah,
So a lot of it, we need to look at history instead of just everything. And we've been able to pull up documents and articles prior to 2022 on our show that talks about that were even mainstream media articles that talked about the Nazis in Ukraine and called them such. And then all of a sudden, we quit calling them Nazis in the mainstream media.
right. And in the mainstream media here, we started to celebrate them when they visited the United States, even though they were wearing their uniforms with
With Nazi
Nazi
insignia.
insignia on them. God,
Yeah,
incredible. So Day
that's
Day
why.
says, "Hi, ladies and snazzy red beret guy. Glad I found you tonight. If Germany joins BRICS, that'll be awesome." Well, there are a couple little problems there. First, okay, Germany is in the EU. Germany doesn't have its own currency. Its currency, okay, is the euro.
Yeah,
So Germany can't really join BRICS as long as it stays in the EU. It would have to lobby to get the EU to join BRICS.
yeah.
And it's
Um,
very doubtful the EU would do that.
See, the U.S. is money sovereign. Russia's money sovereign, aren't they, as well?
You're saying the other states that are part of the Federation
Yeah,
are sovereign states also.
yeah. Well, monetarily too.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay,
money.
I don't think the states of the Russian Federation, okay, are monetarily sovereign. Okay, at least not according to the MMT definition.
Okay.
Because we're gonna have to see.
Okay, Day Day says now we just need Thor back to join in. Okay, BL says it's delusional to even think that Ukraine can beat Russia. How do you propose they do that? And he points out Russia has a much bigger army and has nukes and a much bigger population. He says this is no time to take sides. Pick peace.
Yeah.
Exactly. And Kay says with the planes they need. Kay, I'm sorry. If they had F-16s today, they still couldn't win
Mm-mm.
because Russian planes are the equivalent of the F-16s, and we don't have enough F-16s to give to Ukraine anyway.
Yeah. And one thing I want to add in on that is we've been giving so much money over to there, which I understand MMT, but we're not doing anything for our citizens. We're not taking care of the citizens here in the US. We're not taking care. We've got so many people who are struggling, and ever since COVID have lost their homes, lost their jobs, lost their income. We need to rebuild our country rather than fighting somebody else's battle.
Okay, and there, what I'd like to say is that, yes, we have the money to
Yeah.
spend, okay, on Ukraine and all kinds of foolish adventures, and still have the money we need to build up things here.
But we're not doing it, is
But
the
there
problem.
is a shortage here, a real shortage.
Hmm.
And that shortage is a shortage of attention span. It's a shortage of decision-making load. A large part of our government is currently preoccupied with the Ukraine war. They don't have time or energy to pay attention to domestic needs,
Like Ohio.
like Ohio or like Joe Biden is the president, okay, of all Americans. What's he doing spending all his time on Ukraine? Most people in this country don't give a fig for what happens in Ukraine. He's not representing our country by playing games every day with the State Department and the CIA and the deep state over decision making about Ukraine. He needs to be paying attention to what we all need in this country. He needs to be paying attention to how we can get out of the grip of the corporations. Instead, he goes around saying nothing will fundamentally change. He's basically saying, I'm going to kill democracy here in the United States.
Yeah.
We're in no position to tolerate that sort of crap anymore.
Too
He
many
is
people are
our
dying.
president. He is our representative. We elected him, and we can see to it that following 2024, that he won't be the president anymore. And we have to have that same attitude towards the next president. And by the way, we've been very wise to see that the next president is not a nominee of either party, because major party nominees, every one of them, are all bought.
Hmm.
We cannot tolerate that any longer. Okay, I have a bunch of pop-ups going on here. Excuse me while I get rid of them. BL says, I'd rather we didn't send any planes or money to Ukraine. This is only going to escalate more war. There will be no more Ukraine. Completely agree with you, BL. I want to be able to afford food at the grocery store. So do I. That will depend upon our repairing our supply chains and are not diverting attention from that extremely critical need. And by the way, it would also depend on our stopping price gouging, okay, in this country. And while we're paying attention to Ukraine and creating shortages here as a result, it does hurt the capability of our citizens here to afford to buy food at the grocery store. There is a connection there. We have to recognize the connection.
And we need to repair our infrastructure here.
We certainly do. When China has the kind of infrastructure that it has, and we have the kind of infrastructure that we have, that means that the people of the rulers of China are taking care of the needs of their people, and that the rulers of the United States are not taking care of our people. And
Mhm.
we need to change that. Day Day says if Germany joins BRICS, we can call it GRIPS, which would be so cool. But it'll leave out Brazil, dag nabbit. Russia's troops are surrendering to Ukraine and then fighting Russia. Kay, what are you reading? What are you watching? What are your sources of information? I mean, really, Kay. Kay says, me too, BL, but one thing has nothing to do with the other. Kay says, our own country is an oligarchy. They don't give a damn about us. I know. And Kay, they control the media. Or let's say they're in partnership with the media to control us.
The corporations that control the media, that own the media companies, lobby and contribute to the campaigns of our government.
Right. And they are telling our media, are giving you silly stories about how Russian troops are surrendering to Ukraine and then fighting Russia. By and large, that is a lie. There's no indication at all of that going on. I don't know who's feeding you that crap, but I'm telling you, it is crap. And you're right about our own country. It's an
Yeah,
oligarchy, and they don't give a damn about us. So don't you go around believing what its mass media say,
it's state ran media.
because they are part of the oligarchy. And yes, they are state run media. Okay, so going on a little bit. Gostot says there's 100 big pharma companies in the Ukraine face orange frowning. Yeah, big pharma companies were involved in Ukraine. Yeah, they said someone told me that OATTON wanted to attack Russia after World War II using German military. Not sure I know what OATTON is. But there were elements inside of the US government that wanted to attack Russia after World War II, not
Hmm.
using the German military. It was before the war that elements of our government wanted to use the German military to attack Russia. There were a lot of people who wanted us to stay out of the war and let Russia and Germany fight it out because they wanted to use the German military to fight Russia. But after the war, there was no German military because we disbanded it. So
And
they,
Germany was broke up
yes,
by the Berlin Wall.
broken up and impoverished
Hmm.
and had little no manufacturing capability at that time, and was devastated by the war and had little remaining capability to fight. Kay says we're right on the edge of a fascist government. Right
Yep,
again, Kay. I feel
we
bad
are.
for both the Russians and the Ukraine people. They're suffering while the U.S. makes dollars on arms. I don't know if the U.S. is making dollars on arms, but U.S. companies are making dollars on arms, and it is disgusting. Russell Gorman
Which
says, sorry, go ahead, Brandy.
I was going to say, which that money gets back into the politicians' pockets through lobbying and campaign donations.
Yes, or some small portion of
Yeah,
that money.
some of it. Yeah, not all of it. Of course, they keep some of it, but yes.
Well, the point being that they keep billions and billions and billions of it, and maybe they give 1% of what they get to the politicians. But that's enough to buy off our politicians
Hmm.
because they sell our democracy cheap.
Which is why we have a fascist government.
Yes. Russell Gorman says all of U.S. history is based on conquest and might makes right. I have to largely agree, Russell. Kay says, yes, Lana. And Lana says, which general was it? Wasn't MacArthur because he was in Asia, I think. Which general? I'm not sure. You're referring to something I said about a general of the United States. Okay, I'm not sure what you're referring to there, Lana, but if I was, I'd be happy to answer the question. Okay, does anybody else want to say something at this point? Because I think we're about through the comments.
I'm going to say good night. I've got to go get the kitties to bed. I just wanted to welcome you back
Thank you very much.
and enjoyed the conversation.
I did too.
Yes, and happy birthday again.
And thank you.
Yes, indeed.
Have a good night, you guys. I'm heading out.
Okay.
Good night.
Good night.
So I'd like to say further, you said we wanted to go to war with Russia, but not use the German army. After the Second World War, some wanted to go to war with Russia. Yes. Well, with the Soviet Union then, because it was the Soviet Union. Yes. And I don't know whether MacArthur wanted to do that. At the time of the Korean War, he wanted to use our nuclear weapons against North Korea and China. That's what he wanted to do. But there were many people within the defense establishment at that time. For example, General Curtis LeMay, who was the head of the Strategic Air Command, was interested in going to war with the Soviet Union and using our nuclear weapons because for a few years we had a nuclear advantage over the Russians. Okay, Lana said, was it Eisenhower? No, Eisenhower didn't want to go to war with the Soviet Union. He was following the containment policy. The containment policy was about containing the Soviet Union, expansion of the Soviet Union, and it was based on the ideas that internal conflicts inside of the Soviet Union would cause the Soviet Union to collapse. It was the policy of the Truman administration to follow the containment policy of George Kennan. Okay, and was it Eisenhower? Harry Truman fired him over that? No. Harry Truman fired General MacArthur. Okay. He didn't fire Eisenhower. Eisenhower voluntarily left the Truman administration so he could run for president on the ticket of the Republican Party. Eisenhower was a cold warrior, but he followed the containment policy as well, which meant the avoidance of war with Russia. The containment policy was about the avoidance of war on the theory that Russia and the communist regime in Russia would collapse internally. That never did happen, but it did allow us to avoid war with Russia until disarmament came and general agreements with the Russians, which made us safe for a while, made us safe during the 1980s, and created the situation which then allowed us to exploit the collapse of the communist regime in Russia. In a sense, the containment policy worked because the communist regime in Russia did eventually fall of its own weight, in inefficiencies. Truman fired MacArthur over trying to fight with China. Yes, that's true. And LeMay was a nut. He definitely was a nut. Okay, he was one of those who was advocating that Kennedy should bomb Cuba in order to solve the Cuban Missile Crisis. He was raging for war over Cuba. Kennedy very wisely avoided that, but only by the skin of our teeth. Okay, well, I guess that's all I have for tonight. Tomorrow, I will be back with, well, we agree Biden is bought and paid for, as is Ohio K. So we certainly agree about that. The only thing we don't agree about is essentially putting the interests of Ukraine ahead of the interests of the rest of the world. That's where we disagree. Having said that, though, tomorrow I'll be back with a Dump the Corruption show that will continue the examination of the Congressional Progressive Caucus members to see if there is even one who can pass the litmus test of not taking money from the wealthy or from the corporations or from the super PACs or from the PACs. In other words, if we can find even one congressperson who is living on small dollar donations alone.
I think we'll all fall off our chairs if we found one.
By this time, we would. Almost through the Congressional Progressive Caucus entirely, and we haven't even found one yet. Okay, I will say, though, with respect to AOC, she is the one who is best at living on small donations alone because she gets so many of them. She's developed a machine for getting them, so she doesn't have to take very much money from super PACs or PACs, or her funding that way is the exception rather than the rule in her campaign, and she is almost alone from that point of view. So, having said that, we'll be discussing that again tomorrow. Lana asks, "What about Bernie?" Yeah, Bernie is pretty good about that too, as well. So, okay, I think that Bernie is an exception that proves the rule, okay, as well. But by the way, Bernie still did fail the litmus test, and AOC failed the litmus test too. As applying the litmus test strictly, both Bernie and AOC were disqualified. Anyway, I'll be back tomorrow with that. Then on Thursday, I'll have something else on empowering democracy. And on Friday, I'll be back with another Dump the Corruption stream. So that will be my schedule for this week. I am cutting down to 4 nights a week because I often appear on Brandy and D shows as well, okay, as a panelist. So I think 5 nights a week was too much for me, and that was part of the reason why I had this stress reaction. So I am cutting back on some things.
And I was going to say, please hit the like button, subscribe, and share if you haven't done that yet to Dr. Joseph Firestone.
And please hit the like, share, and subscribe buttons also for Around the World with Brandy and D as well. We all work very closely on both sets of streams. We are allied very tightly and support each other very strongly, as you have seen tonight, and as you will continue to see.
Yes. And Joe really needs you to buy him a coffee.
Thank you. It would be very nice if you bought me a coffee or contributed to my Patreon account. I'd very much like that.
Yes.
And Gene Cat, subscribe to my channel. Thank you, Gene Cat. I guess you're not here, but thank you for subscribing to the channel if you are here. And again, good night.
Okay, one second.
9 p.m.
Lana says down there, where is Greg tonight?
Yeah, where is Greg tonight? Greg still hasn't been able to come back. He has a lot of commitments at work which have stopped him from coming back. We hope to have him back soon.
Yes, we miss Greg.
He has many good things to say. Sandy Degg. Sorry, can't stay. Doctor's visit early. Love you all. We love you, Sandy. We had no idea you were here.
Yes, thank you, Sandy.
Thanks a million, Sandy. Okay, everybody, good night. And we'll see you tomorrow.
Yes, good night.